over the last week, we have had Rabbi Nathan Laufer as our scholar in residence here at the SDJA Jewish Academy. He has spoken to our faculty, he's spoken to our senior leadership team, he's been engaging with the students, teaching classes. He has met with community members, has done 2 private dinners at community members' homes. He is a legend in San Diego. For those of you who may not know him, I have a little bit of his bio. I'm not going to read the entire thing, because I think you would rather hear from him. He was a president emeritus at the Wexner Heritage Foundation, and after he left the Wexner Foundation, he was at the Tikva Fund in Israel as the director of Israel programming for about 7 years. Rabbi Nathan Laufer has been our scholar in residence here at the Academy for the last 4 days, and he's ending his little tour at SDJA by speaking to you this morning, our parents. And our topic this morning is cutting to the chase. What are our responsibilities as Jewish parents? So please join me in welcoming Rabbi Nathan Laufer.
So good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. There's a little bit of hubris in my title. Like I'm going to come here from 9,000 miles away and tell you what your responsibilities are as Jewish parents in San Diego circa 2016. It will be kind of like my asking you to go to an Israeli army base and lecture the officers on what their roles and responsibilities are as officers in the Israeli army. Not entirely appropriate, I think. I'm sure our roles could easily be reversed. I could sit down and you could tell me what it means to be a Jewish parent in a very challenging environment in which we find ourselves today. But be that as it may, I'm still going to cut to the chase and try to share with you how the Jewish tradition understood the roles and responsibilities of Jewish parents, not because I want to force more upon you. You have enough upon yourself. But I'd like to reframe for you what it is that you're doing already, and perhaps that will lend additional meaning and purpose to all those actions and efforts that you invest in your children. So let me start by saying that in ancient times, times of the Bible, for instance, children did not go to school, right? They grew up and apprenticed in their family homesteads, right? And they learned how to be what they became by watching their parents and listening to their parents and older brothers and sisters and so on and so forth. And that's how they grew up. It was kind of self-evident that the family's role was to provide all the life skills that the child would need when he or she grew up. But by the time of the Talmud, which is in the early centuries of the Common Era, okay, so we're talking something like 1,500, 2,000 years ago, things began to change. And they began to change because the Greek and Roman models for educating youth started to penetrate into Jewish society. The land of Israel was only partially sovereign, beginning with the conquering of Alexander the Great, 333 before the Common Era, and then the conquering of the land of Israel by the Romans. So shortly before the first century of the Common Era. And they had schools. This was a novel concept. And so Jews started to have schools. And the rabbis then found it necessary to start to articulate and to define, to delineate what exactly are the roles of the parents versus the roles of the schools. Still, the schools played a relatively minor role. The parental role was the major role. Today, the parental role is maybe somewhat further removed than it was in those times, because children spend the majority of their waking hours in the school environment. That's probably a true statement. And a great part of their family environment as well, doing homework and preparing for the next day and studying for tests and doing papers, especially as you get older in high school and so on. So I think what we need to do is we need to kind of figure out how the partnership of parents and school comes together to meet the vision that the rabbis originally had of parental roles in the Talmud. So I've given you a piece of paper. It's not to cut down trees or branches, I'm giving you the piece of paper because maybe you want to take notes. I know this is really a wild notion on paper and taking notes, but you know, I'm really old school, so I hope that's going to work for you. So the Talmud, you look in front of you, the Talmud in Kedushin, one of the 60 tractates, one of the 60 volumes of the Talmud, says that a parent is responsible for 6 things: to circumcise their male son, to redeem their firstborn son from the priest, we'll explain that, to teach the child Torah, to teach the child a profession or vocational skill. I may be going a little bit out of order there. To help find a spouse for the child. And some also say to teach the child how to swim. Okay? So we have 6 items altogether. Now, what's the deeper value underlying each of these categories? So the first is circumcision. Well, what circumcision teaches the child and the parents who are responsible for the circumcision is that you're imprinting on the child's very flesh that he is part of the Jewish people. And it's not just a coincidence that the imprinting is taking place on the procreative organ of the male, because it's all about the extended Jewish people from the beginning of time until the end of time. And this child is a continuation. He's a bridge. He's a link. He's a part of the chain that makes that bridge go on from the beginning to the end. The very first Jew, Abraham, was commanded to circumcise himself and his male children as a sign of the covenant between God and all the Jews who would be subsequently born. And so important is circumcision that by tradition, a male Jew by choice should be circumcised in order to enter the Jewish people. And even an adult man who was born of a Jewish mother and did not have a circumcision, let's say he was born in the former Soviet Union where circumcision was frowned upon, okay? He's still obligated, if he leaves the Soviet Union and comes to the United States or comes to Israel, to have himself circumcised. Even though he's Jewish, but still he needs to circumcise himself even as an adult to be a fully fledged member of the Jewish community. Now, what does that mean? Why? Why is that so? Why could a person do that? It means that Judaism is not merely a religion of faith. It's that too, but it's a flesh and blood family. The Jewish people are a big, extended flesh and blood family. We have a special obligation to people who are members of our family. If you think about it, because we're a family and not just a religion of faith, the state of Israel, which represents the Jewish people, has done some pretty extraordinary things in its short history. It was, I don't know if any of you would remember this, but I do. July 4th, 1976, there was a hijacking of a plane that had many Jewish passengers on board, and it was hijacked to Uganda. Israel did not have to do anything because it wasn't an Israeli plane. It was, a plane of a lot of different passengers, but over 100 passengers. But because there were so many Jews on board, the state of Israel felt that it needed to launch a rescue operation, flying thousands of miles over Africa to go and rescue these 100 passengers because they were in danger of being killed. The prime minister's brother, his name is Yoni Netanyahu, fell in that rescue mission. I don't know of any other country in the world that would do something crazy like that. This is the same reason why in 1991, some of you may remember this, or not, there was, Ethiopia was on the verge of being overrun by Eritrean rebels. And there were a group of about 15,000 Ethiopian Jews who had gathered in Addis Ababa, the capital, and hoping to escape before the rebels overran, because it would be a massacre. And now, these Ethiopian Jews were a very interesting group, because the Jewish people, as we've evolved over the centuries, no matter what the denomination, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, New Age, Renewal, it doesn't matter. It didn't resemble at all the practices, the language, the culture of the Ethiopian Jews. Yet, we felt that they were family. And for family, you don't think twice about doing crazy things to help and save your family. So Israel did, you know, to me was still a miracle. I still get shivers when I think about it. They sent over transport planes, and in 24 hours, they rescued over 14,000 Ethiopian Jews. They flew them out of Addis Ababa and brought them to Israel to settle in Israel. And by the way, they were able to do that in part because of the help of American Jews and other Jews in the world, but primarily American Jews who helped to finance that and the resettlement of all these Jews. So you have an important role to play in that. But this is, again, it only takes place because Israel considers Jews all over the world to be part of their family. This is also the reason for Israel's law of return, which gives every Jew in the world, or even someone just married to a Jew, or even the grandchild of one Jewish grandparent, the automatic right of Israeli citizenship. So we are all kind of one mishpacha. That's the Hebrew word. We're part of one greater physical Jewish family. Now, as parents, you know, I don't expect you to whisk your children on jets to safety if something happens to them, although you might wish to. But we can certainly convey to our children, to their friends, to all young people that we come in contact with, a sense of the kind of caring and concern that we would express towards our own children, towards our own family. And that would communicate to them that, as they say in Hebrew, Kol Yisrael arevim ze laze. All the Jewish people are responsible for one another. And one other thing, families accept where each member of the family is, no matter what their strengths are, their weaknesses, intellectually, personally, ideologically. Every member of our family is unique, precious, irreplaceable. And those values are all symbolized by circumcision. The second obligation that Talmud speaks about is redeeming the firstborn son by giving 5 silver coins to the priest. And the Torah tells us that the reason for this quaint custom is to thank God for saving the Jewish people's firstborn when God slew the firstborn of the oppressive ancient Egyptians to free the Jewish people from slavery. Okay, I know it's a mouthful, but that's what it's about. In other words, the redeeming of the firstborn, that second parental obligation, is the symbol of our obligation to tell our children the story of the Exodus from Egypt, which is our story. It's the collective founding story of the Jewish people. Children and adults, too, learn best and learn fastest through stories. Again, in my time, President Reagan was called the great communicator. And he was called that because he was a great storyteller. Okay? He told stories, and people understood where they were in the American dream by listening to his stories. Our stories is what shapes who we are. They explain to ourselves and to others what our identities are. And they deeply inform us of what our roots. Every person, every family, every nation needs to know what our stories are, where we came from. My children never tire of asking my wife and I, whenever we get together, especially on holidays, you know, about the details of, yeah, tell us again, how did you meet? And, you know, when did you go on your first date? You know, and how did you ask Ima to marry you, Rabbi? You know, it was like, when did that take place? And where was the first place you lived together? Wow. And what was the first meal, Abba, that you made for Ima? Tell us the truth, okay? And, you know, Ima, tell us, how did it come out? They're always curious about their roots. And these stories constitute our families, our roots. They explain how we came to be a family, and how we grew, and what's important to us, and where they come from. The same is true of nations. I grew up in the United States, learning about George Washington and the apple tree, Valley Forge, Abe Lincoln walking 5 miles each day to get to school and back, right? The Civil War. These are America's, or some of America's founding stories, right? They're crucial to who we are. It's how we think of ourselves. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, that comes from our stories and the battles and the fights that we had in order to achieve those values. Children in Israel learn about not only the distant historical past, they don't only just study the Bible, or the Talmud, right? They also learn about Ben-Gurion's Declaration of Independence on May 14, 1948, and the war which followed, in which the 600,000 Jews of the Yishuv fended off 5 invading Arab armies and lost 1% of the population in the process. And that becomes part of their identity, their essential identity. It's very much a survivalist identity. Our jobs as parents is to communicate in every way possible through words, songs, through the art we put up in our homes, the movies and YouTubes that we expose our children to, through really every verbal and visual and kinesthetic means that we can think of, are people's stories, so that our children know who they are and feel pride at being themselves part of the story. It's to teach them about Israel, yes, and to take them to Israel, because there, every building and every stone tells a story. It's all got a history, right? And it's a story not only of survival, but also of great thriving vitality. And they see that, and they feel a lot of pride. As in circumcision, if a person was not redeemed as a 30-day-old infant, then he has an obligation to redeem himself. That means, as we've defined this obligation, each person, parents as well as children, have the obligation to learn the stories that form our essential identity, our founding stories, to study the narrative of our sacred canon, right, what's called the Tanakh, the Bible, study Jewish history, because that's the continuation of our story, to help fill out our own identities, and to be able to share with all those around us those inspiring tales. And we do have a really inspiring story. The third parental obligation in the text in front of you is to teach your child Torah. Now, Torah, in truth, encompasses the first 2 things as well that we've talked about. The sense of family, of peoplehood, the stories that are the sagas that made up our people. But in this context, I think that Torah refers to our culture, our ethics, our rituals, our liturgy, and our traditions. This is closer to how the term actually Torah is used in the 3rd book of the Bible, the book of Leviticus. Now, Judaism has a 3,000-year-old set of traditions. It's what sociologists today call a thick culture, as opposed to the thin, often superficial culture that constitutes the Western world today. Western world memory is about 2 days old, and then it's old news. It doesn't really have relevance anymore. Obviously, when you're thinking about 3,000 years old, whoa, that's a big load to carry. Now, what's wonderful about this load is that it can inform every moment of our lives. Each moment can be infused with this thick culture, blessings that we utter before and after partaking of food, for instance, which instills in all of us an attitude of gratitude. You know, there's a tradition that a human being each day should utter 100 blessings. That's a lot of blessings. Now, why would you want to do that? You want to do that because you want to ingrain that in yourself and in your children, that there's so much to be thankful for. There's so much that I want to bless God for. The fact that I can stand here in front of you, right, And we can share this moment together is a reason to be thankful. It's a reason to utter a blessing. The fact that we can walk and we can talk and we can eat and we can dress ourselves and we can drive and we can look out the window and see this most beautiful place. It's like these are all blessings. And we take them for granted, but we shouldn't take them for granted. We should be uttering 100 blessings a day, because that's what the Jewish wisdom tradition said is how you make yourself into a more fulfilled, more spiritual person. The mezuzahs that we put on our doors remind us that we need to act like a Jew, both within the privacy of our homes, but also when we go out to the world. It's not like, we'll be a Jew in the house and not be a Jew outside, or be a Jew outside and not be a Jew inside. No, it goes both ways. It's on the doorstep of the home. The traditions of Shabbat, which teach us to value people for what they are and not just for what they do or what they consume. One day a week, right, the tradition is that we don't produce, we don't work. We're not enslaved to anybody, not to our jobs, not to our employers. No, we're free. That's what freedom is. We free ourselves on the Shabbat. Okay? We don't consume. We're not judging ourselves by what we can buy that day. Okay? We don't judge ourselves by our homes, our cars, what we're wearing. That's not what Shabbat is supposed to be about. Shabbat is about being with the people in our lives, our children, our spouses, parents, if we live close enough to them, our friends, our relatives, our community, our neighbors. It's about being with people instead of dealing with things. That's the traditions of Shabbat. This is our thick culture. Our ethics of welcoming guests, of giving tzedakah to those less fortunate than us, or just lending a helping hand, doing what the tradition calls chesed. Okay? When someone needs it because they're ill, they've lost a loved one, or they're just feeling overwhelmed by the demands of life. Our families, in partnership with this day school, are the main transmitters of this amazing, value-filled, thick, 3,000-year-old culture that has no parallel, frankly, in Western secular culture. Like circumcision and redeeming oneself, a person has the obligation to him or herself to study Torah, to learn from the spiritual wisdom of our tradition. And the truth is that if children see that we as adults learn, then they know that we're walking the talk, that we're for real, we're authentic. Okay? We're not just sending them to school to learn, we're continuing to learn. And that's the job of a human being, to continue to learn and to grow. So that's the obligation to study and to learn Torah. The fourth parental obligation. Again, I'm a little out of order here, but you'll bear with me. Is to teach the child a profession or vocational skill. Now, in the distant past, you as the parents taught this to your child. You taught them how to be farmers. You taught them how to be shepherds. You taught them how to be skilled artisans, perhaps, if you knew how to be one yourself. And today we tend to commission our schools with the burden of doing that. Now, but here I think the comment of Rabbi Yehuda, I think he's called there, on the Talmud is pertinent. He comments on this requirement. Whoever does not teach his child a profession or skill, it's as if he's taught them to be robbers. Wow. I think that what Rabbi Judah was saying, and is alluding to here, is that it's not enough to teach the child a raw skill, to teach them to be a great professional. One has to also teach the child to use that skill ethically. And that is the primary responsibility of one's home environment. Every skill can be used to enhance human life or to destroy it. The way that doctors practice their medicine, the way that lawyers practice their profession, or that accountants and investment bankers practice theirs, can be done in a way that is fair and forward-looking or devious and destructive. Physicians can save lives or traffic in organ parts. Investment specialists can build their clients' wealth or abscond with it through Ponzi schemes and the like. Now, SDJA is known for its excellent secular studies. But as a Jewish day school, SDJA knows that it is not sufficient to teach science and math and computers. It also, in partnership with you, the parents, needs to teach the values in which those skills can be harnessed to improve the world and not its opposite. As an aside, I would just add here, one of the wonderful things about Israel, and the reason you can take pride in this state, is that as a startup nation, it comes with all sorts of high-tech and low-tech innovations that are used to enhance human life. Low-drip irrigation to grow crops where they could not be grown before, cybersecurity systems that protect innocent individual people from identity theft, and nations to protect themselves from cyber warfare, which threatens, for instance, the nation's electrical power grid. That's real. And on and on. This is what I call creation for the sake of relation. That's what Israel, at its best, exemplifies. Any good school can teach science, but a good Jewish day school teaches science in the context of advancing human values. And so does a Jewish family. The fifth item is finding the child a spouse. And here you may be saying to yourselves, well, this is about the boundary of where a contemporary marriage responsibility ends, because we really can't do that. But if we think about what it takes to marry someone, to make a commitment, we know that a person needs to be capable of love, of commitment, and caring about someone other than yourself. All of these values are instilled first and foremost in the home. And it can be reinforced in the Jewish day school environment. If a child feels valued and he's loved for who they are, they learn to see themselves as part of a larger people, part of a larger story, part of a larger tradition that enriches them, that gives them meaning, and to which they therefore feel commitment, and if ethical values, responsibility and care for the other are part of the moral fabric of the home and the school, then together again we'll have done our part, I think, in preparing the child for a serious, committed, responsible relationship as an adult. If they learn to value the role that Judaism plays in their lives too, they may also seek a mate who similarly values or could come to value the Jewish tradition. The sixth and final parental role is to teach the child how to swim. Now, there are many ways of interpreting this responsibility. It's clearly a metaphor, right? And the truth is probably all of them are right. At the easiest level would be, give the child the opportunity to engage in sports, okay? To be physically active, to learn how to be part of and contribute to a team, to exert their best efforts because they're motivated to excel. Ever since the ancient Greeks, athletics has been an important part of character development. Or it might mean something as prosaic as providing driving lessons for your children because, it's an essential skill to be able to function in the real world, the modern world. But if we go on a more abstract level, teaching a child how to swim in Talmudic times may have been a way of teaching them to survive in unexpected circumstances where they suddenly find themselves in possible danger. Thus, we could see this as a metaphor for learning how to swim through life, navigating the shoals of the stormy seas that surround and threaten to engulf young people today, shunning social media shaming, substance abuse, sexually degrading relationships, gang violence, learning how to dive in deep water, which is our modern world, and emerging whole, in one piece, and even innovative for making the effort. Or it might mean, in a more specific Jewish sense, to learn how to swim in the increasingly challenging anti-Israel environment of the universities, which our children go to after they graduate high school. Preparing them to confidently field and respond to delegitimizing attacks against the Jewish people and the Jewish state, being able to marshal the facts, the context, and the political realities to defend themselves, their people, and their countries. All of these, teaching your children who attend SDJA to feel that they are part of one big family, that they share a common story, an amazingly rich culture and way of life, teaching them to defend these at the university in the midst of narratives and academic biases that often seek to undermine them, preparing the students to go on after the university education to make their professional contributions to the world in an ethical way, and to prepare themselves to undertake the caring and commitment to marry, build a family, and build a Jewish future. All of these are things that I'm sure you all already do. But putting them in the context of the Jewish tradition's understanding of Jewish parents' obligation to their children may lend your activities some additional meaning and purpose. Let me just conclude by saying this. Having spoken about your responsibilities as parents, this does not mean that the schools which they attend, or the school in particular, is absolved of these responsibilities. I hope I've made clear that this is a partnership. It's you and the school. You thought that when you married your spouse that you had a partnership. Well, you married your school. You didn't know it, but you really married them. And they become an integral part of your life all through their schooling. Hope this doesn't send you back to your therapist. But the truth is, to the extent that this school can convey and reinforce the best values that you as parents seek to convey to your children, to that extent, it'll be more likely that your children will imbibe those values and make them his or her own. But one thing I want to assure you of, your work as parents is truly heroic. It's the truth. It's the biggest job in the world. It's the most important job in the world. It's what the tradition calls holy work. So, may God bless all of you for your many efforts and give you the results of the work that